Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the CogniFit podcast. Today, I'll be interviewing Grace, who is the founder of Dais, a company that's on a mission to eliminate one-time use period and bladder leak products and empower people to feel seamlessly confident throughout their everyday lives. Through the social community that she has built, Days Like This, they focus on educating menstruating people on their menstrual cycles to achieve more awareness and a heightened sense of well-being when it comes to womb health and awareness. Today, we'll be exploring menstrual health with her, as well as all the underlying factors and things it entails. So Grace, thank you so much for being with us today.
You are most welcome. I'm excited.
And to start the conversation off, I'd love to ask you, what do you think we misunderstand the most as women and menstruating people when it comes to menstrual cycles?
Yeah, I think in general, menstruating people tend to have a large gap when it comes to education. And this is what I found by speaking to so many people about the topic, that if you really, in essence, think about it, the time that you learned the most about menstruation was in school. For a lot of us, this was a long time ago, right? I'm 30 years old, so that was a while ago since I had formal education on it. And that is a very structured approach to learning about menstruation. So I feel like you learn kind of a bit about the science behind it, but not so much about like how it affects you on an everyday basis. And I think then how else do we kind of get information in terms of like throughout your life? You're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're Googling stuff, you're on the news. And it's just a fact that menstruation is quite a taboo topic. So on top of that, you just naturally get an education gap. And I think we saw it most when we were developing our period underwear products, that we were asking some women, how much blood do you think you lose during a cycle? And the answer was like, oh, I think like a liter, maybe. Yeah, that seems about right. When in actual fact, you lose 60 to 80 milliliters. So this is like a complete different fact when it comes out to it, of what people like perceive versus what is the reality. So I think that is a huge misunderstanding that people have in terms of how the menstrual cycle actually works and what the different stages are. And I think there's a very big focus on PMS, which is premenstrual syndrome, which most of us know, it's like 5 days before your period, you kind of get this feeling and you're like, oh, I'm annoyed, I'm irritated, I have cramps. But actually, there's so much more that happens throughout the rest of the cycle as well, which we kind of just ignore or we don't think about. So I think this is a huge issue. And you see it as well with, for example, athletes. So they actually perform sometimes their best when they are on their period. And this is actually because estrogen and progesterone are really low during this time. So it's really interesting to see, like, it can affect you more than you really think about it. And it's not just during bleeding, it can be throughout the whole menstrual cycle.
That is and one because when it comes to, I have a question on that. That's really interesting because I feel like they always say that sport helps you, like, and it helps energize you when you're going through your menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
But out of curiosity, why does it always feel sluggish during that time? Because I feel like most women have that, and menstruating people have this reverse effect with it sometimes, where there's no energy, so you immediately associate that with being more sluggish with your body.
Yeah.
But if it's the opposite for some athletes, I'd love to go into that a little bit deeper because I find that really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's a combination of things, right? I think the way that your hormones work is that both the estrogen and the progesterone drop to the lowest point when you're actually bleeding. And in some ways, this is kind of replicating what you might have more closely to a male hormone system. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, you are performing a pretty standard rate. You don't have as many outside influences in terms of hormones, but at the same time, because there's a sudden drop, this is what kind of sends your body into a bit of a shock. So at the same time, you can have cramps. There's a lot of people who feel more fatigue during this time. And I think if you're not trained properly and you're not used to it, then it can also be a time where you don't feel at your best. So it can be a time where you actually should take it easy a little bit more. It does help you to move, definitely, but you might want to do like walks or yoga or something a little bit less impact than kind of these high intensity sports. But it's so fascinating, how it can change throughout the cycle.
So I guess the cue there is really just to be intuitive with what you're feeling and how you're tuning into your body when you're in your cycle to understand how to move with it.
Completely. And there's also another factor, which I think is really interesting, which is that during your cycle, or when you're on your period, your body is actually using a higher basal level of calories because your body's working a lot, right? Like this is a lot going on inside. So you tend to lose like 200 calories approximately when you're on your period. And this then takes you again into that sluggish phase. If you don't know about it and you're not supplementing your diet with a little bit more calories, maybe a little bit more nutrients, because you're also losing quite a lot of nutrients and iron, then you can also push yourself into being more sluggish. So I think this knowledge of like what stage your body is in the cycle can really help, both if you're a professional athlete who has to really be careful with their training, their nutrition, and so on. But at the same time, for like us normal people who are not professional athletes, to also just understand how we can feel our best during each stage of our cycle.
100%. And what would you say, like from a diet perspective, like to go deeper with that, when like how to eat when you know that you're approaching your period and during your cycle as well? Because I feel like not many people really talk about that, the nutritional value that comes with like our menstrual health.
Yeah. And our bodies are giving us signals which are sometimes wrong, unfortunately. So our bodies are telling us they're hungry and they're cravings. And this is an extremely normal thing that a lot of people experience during PMS, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should be following them. So this whole idea of like, I'm sorry, I ate a tub of ice cream, I was on my period, isn't doing the best for you. The biggest recommendation is to really get the right nutrients in. So dark chocolate, for example, is great for you. That can really help kind of relieve cramps, and it can also get a little bit closer to the craving. I know some people don't like it that dark, but you know, you can give it a go. Leafy greens, these are great, really help with your iron. People who eat meat, it's not actually such a bad time to kind of have something a little bit heavier in terms of a red meat. It's going to help you with your iron levels as well. But of course, if you are a vegan or vegetarian, there's so many options as well that kind of allow you to get that protein and that iron in a little bit but just before your period, ideally.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And what would you say like frustrates you the most right now about how menstrual health is approached within our society?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think two main things stand out for me personally. I think one is the tabooness of it. And you look at it and it's like 50% of the population has dealt with or is dealing with it at one time in their lives. And I think it's something like 26% of the population is actually are menstruating people at one moment, because of course you have teenagers, you have on the other side after menopause. So you're about 26%. And people find it unacceptable to talk about. And I just find that shocking, you know, like if we're not going to be talking about it, how are we supposed to be educating ourselves? How are we supposed to be understanding, you know, what's happening to our body, how we can feel about it? How do we expect someone else to understand what we're going through? For example, someone who doesn't menstruate, they should know what is happening, and they don't. And I think this whole thing can put a lot of shame onto people. I think you can feel really alone. I think you can feel confused. And I think this is what a lot of people feel. And so this topic of taboos is one of my like biggest things that I just kind of want to talk about it as much as possible and make it normal. And then I would say the second thing, which is a bit more personal for me because it was a decision that I took last year, but birth control. Birth control and the menstrual cycle is such an important topic. And I went on the pill when I was 17 years old, and I just came off last year in April when I was 29. That's a long time to be on a pill, right? Throughout most of that time, I thought I was having a period. So I was like, you know, I take my 3 weeks, I have a week break, and during that week break, I bleed. Therefore, I have my period. And if I want to, I can stop it, and, you know, the nice flexibility. I also, as a 17-year-old, there's a pretty high chance that I never had a real period, because your first few years of having your period, they are settling into the body. So a cycle is very different at the beginning. So it's kind of possible, I started my period pretty late. I was like 14 years old. It's quite possible that between 14 and 17, I didn't properly kind of get into my body's rhythm, which meant that I had my first real period probably this year, maybe, once my hormones have kind of reset themselves.
When did you start taking the pill?
When I was 17.
So when you were 17. So you said,
Yeah.
so would you say like the introduction phase of 14 to 17 didn't give you that calibration from a hormonal?
Probably not. It's hard to say, right? And I can't remember exactly what my periods were like back then, but there is a pretty high chance that I didn't like evolve quite as far along in my cycle, that it was really truly a what you'd medically call a complete menstrual cycle. Yeah.
Wow.
And I think, you know, the thing that bothers me about it is not birth control. I think there's so many benefits of it, right? Like it's really important to be to take responsibility there. But I equally think, did I know everything I needed to know? Did my mom know everything she needed to know? She was with me in the process. We're very open, but did she know what was happening there? No, she was trying to be a responsible mother as well. But we both didn't ask the right questions, I guess, or we both didn't think about educating ourselves past the norm, because you have a doctor there telling you, hey, it's fine, take it, it's good, you have loads of control and it's kind of nice. And that's a great option for a lot of people, but I just think that we need to have that conversation of what it actually does to your body first, and how that affects your menstrual cycle and how it can affect it later in life. And that's not spoken about enough, in my opinion.
100%. I even think like most doctors don't even know like the full risk factors associated with it. Like
No.
I know also I started quite late with the pill and also went off it very recently. Like when I was 25, I started with like the hormone intervention for protection and just for like general sort of stop with cramping. And I did eventually find a pill that worked for me, but then I also started just realizing the toxic effects that I started feeling naturally. My thoughts started rejecting it, and I had to like honor that my body no longer wanted to have that intervention. But I also recognized how in the medical world, my gyno was just constantly telling me to keep on it, to keep going with it, that nothing was wrong, that it doesn't cause any harm, that it's okay to miss your cycles, that you can control it. But essentially it's completely toxic to our natural way of being and our nature as women.
Completely.
So I've recognized that, like, I think there definitely with like what you were talking about with the taboos earlier, it's like we have to really question what we're doing when it comes to hormonal intervention, which leads me to my next question. How would you say like hormone cycles in general, whether we have interventions or not, are affecting our brain and overall mental health right now?
Yeah. So I think there is a huge connection between periods or hormone cycles and mental health. And I also think there's some start of interesting investigation into the brain. So in general, I would say this area of research is limited. I think that's a big shame, but I think that is unfortunately what we expect with society in the past. Medical investigation has been done predominantly for males, and it's just how it goes. And we're working there and we're getting there, but I think there is a lot of education and research missing. But I found a few really interesting things out about the brain recently that I hadn't thought of before, even as someone who spends quite a lot of time kind of educating myself about the topic. And actually, there's been some studies that shows that estrogen and progesterone, which are the main hormones that are at play in a female body, they fluctuate completely throughout the cycle. And it's thought that actually when the progesterone and estrogen drop, in that moment every month, we actually are able to use our left side of the brain and our right side of the brain more fluidly, which means that we're able to have a completely different attitude to problem solving. So normally the left side of the brain is a more logical side of the brain, and the right side is like then a more holistic, let's say. And if you combine those two together, you can have a very, very different way of solving a problem. So someone who might normally, which is kind of, to be honest, me, I'm a very logical person, and that's how my brain works. I'm 100% sure about it. But I do find that I have been becoming a lot more creative in terms of how I think about things. And you can actually see that then throughout the cycle. If you measure someone's brain activity, you can see how it's changing according to the hormones. I find that fascinating.
It's really interesting to have that insight.
Yeah. And then mental health, I see as a very different topic. I think here it's so much about mood. And it kind of takes me back to the topic that I brought up at the beginning about us not understanding things further than just the science. Us understanding how we feel during the cycle is so important. And actually, when I came off birth control, this was one of the biggest things I wanted to learn and understand. And I read this book called Period Power by Maisie Hill, which I can 100% recommend. And it basically talks about how the different stages in your period are a bit like autumn, winter, summer, and spring. So you kind of go through all of the seasons over your cycle. And I find it so interesting because if you understand where you are in your cycle, you can work your life into that so much easier to give yourself just like a break sometimes. So what the first phase is winter. And here, this is when you're on your period. So you're bleeding, you have PMS, and your energy is quite low, and you feel very introverted and introspective. And you might have some brain fog as well. And if you know that that's coming in like 5 days' time, for example, then I can adapt myself to that so much easier. You know, I can say, hey, Grace, you know, you've got such a busy week that week. You planned in social activities all week. You know, you're going to have brain fog. You know, you're going to be stressed. Why don't I just cancel too? You know, why don't I give myself a break to just be like, I know I'm not going to feel good. Take me home, put me into bed at 9 p.m. You know, I'm going to need that. And you can plan yourself around that rather than getting stressed, which is what I do so often as well, to be like, oh, why do I feel this way? You know, I'm in my winter. There's a reason why I feel this way. Plan it better, because then my mental health is going to be so much better, and I'm going to be able to do what I need to do if I actually pay attention to it. And I think that's a huge, huge learning.
No, 100%. It's so important. I think when you have this awareness of your cycles and the timings that come with it, from an emotional perspective, physical perspective, mental perspective, energetic, like I really do generally think, even though this is something that we have every single month, there's so many things that we overlook and we forget that, oh, it's always secondary. It's like, oh, it's because I'm menstruating, it's because my cycle's coming, it's because, you know, I'm PMSing. It's always a secondary thing. We first question ourselves and then go to the fact that our bodies are going through something that's so profound, you know, part of our healing process, as well as the way that we're able to function and show up in the world. So
and you have, for example, your summer. So I use the bad example in this case of your winter. The summer is actually when you're ovulating. So here you have an estrogen surge and the progesterone is low, and that's when the egg is released. And you are just so positive. Like you will find yourself just high on life, so productive. You'll want to go outside. You'll want to embrace the world. You're going to be feeling good with friends. And you should use that, right? Like, I don't want to waste that. I don't want to waste that sitting at home alone. I want to plan a weekend away with my friends. I want to do something fun during that time. And I think you can really we have this power to kind of pre-predict how we're going to feel. Let's track it and let's make those decisions for ourselves so that we can feel better and we can put ourselves into such a great mindset for the times that are coming up, and protect ourselves when we're needing that protection as well.
I love that. I love that advice that I think can help a lot of women who might be struggling and understanding their cycles.
Yeah.
What do you think you've overcome in understanding, like when it comes to all these tools that you've shared in terms of the awareness that you've built around your menstrual cycle? What has significantly improved the way you now relate to your body when it comes to what you've now applied?
I feel more intuitive. I feel like that's a good way to sum it up. I listen, and I don't think I've ever done that before. And when I was on the pill, I don't think I did that with anything. And me listening means everything, right? It's like how I choose to live my life, how I choose to book my calendar, how I when I choose whether I'm hungry or not. I feel like I used to live on such a flat level that I could say I wasn't really ever hungry. I just taught myself to like eat 3 times a day. And now I'm much more intuitive, and I'm like, am I hungry? Yeah, eat. Am I not hungry? Well, why am I like telling myself to eat when I don't need to? Like, wait an hour and then we'll see. All of these things, sleep, nutrition, exercise. I just think in general that I feel so much more intuitive by just allowing myself to listen to my body and understanding it. And I think that's such a freeing thought.
Yeah, it's beautiful to have that. What advice would you give to women who you think are struggling with that level of intuition with their bodies?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I had was, or that I have, is tracking. So I use a menstrual period tracker, and I have it on my phone, and you can put symptoms in any day, so you can really understand. I use Clue.
Oh, Clue.
Yeah, there's a few out there that are all great. The only thing I would recommend to look at is whether your data is sold. So a lot of them, they make a business out of selling your data. It's a choice. A lot of people don't care, but if you are sensitive to that, just be sensitive of your choice, because you are giving them a lot of data depending on how much you put in. But I just love, understanding that if I'm feeling a little bit off or I'm feeling really great, I sometimes open it and I'm like, oh, I'm ovulating. This all makes sense. Or, oh, I'm here, I'm in my spring. I think that is such a great thing. And it's so easy to do. If you want to document your 10 symptoms a day, do so. But if you also only want to document your period, do so as well. And it helps you just know, okay, my period's coming up, or how you're feeling. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. And then I think one other thing is kind of getting educating yourself further than just the book, right? Like, speak to your friends. How are their periods? How did they deal with symptoms that come? How does your family deal with it? And just talking to different people, educating your partner. For example, if you are together with a guy who knows nothing about the period, which is very common, have these conversations, and it will open up a whole different side of understanding for each other as well. And I just think, allow yourself to embrace it, to understand it, and to speak about it, because it matters. It really matters.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Grace, for sharing your wisdom and your insight on all of this. I also resonated to a lot of the things that you've said and things that I've had to overcome as well when it comes to understanding my own menstrual health. And it was really insightful. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge of the space through the community that you've built. I think it's very inspiring. I think it's definitely going to inspire a lot of women to see, what you're building as well when it comes to breaking down all these taboos and myths around our periods and our cycles. I think are very important to go deeper with this, especially during this time where we have so much information at our fingertips.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to thank you and also invite you to conclude this beautiful episode with a cognitive assessment that's been provided by one of our sponsors to basically give you insight into your own cognitive health when it comes to brain training, and also finding a new balance with our own cognition when it comes to the way that we think, which is very relevant to anybody experiencing brain fog today. So whenever you're ready, I'll make you a host to play.
I love these games.
And share your screen.
I'm excited. Can you see?
Yes, perfect.
Amazing. Okay, so my challenge is to click in the middle of the circles as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Okay. Wish me luck, guys.
You got this.
Let's hope this goes well.
2 minutes.
Okay. So far, so good. Kind of wishing I had a mouse.
Not bad. Accuracy still above 80. Oh, 86%. Where are you in your
Concentration
summer?
mode.
Are you in your summer?
It must be in my summer. I am actually. I'm in my spring.
Oh, fantastic.
It's a good timing. Woo.
Woo!